A dismal hiring outlook for the graduating class of 2026.
Surveys show that job prospects for recent graduates are down significantly from a year ago. So what is going on?
The job market right now is...
I'm Caitlin, I'm a university graduate and I applied to 647 roles before I got one.
Nobody will even give me an interview.
I basically am not able to get a job.
I really don't understand how people are finding full-time jobs. I really don't get it.
A few weeks ago, a post went viral on Reddit. It wasn't a political scandal. It was just a person describing their job search. They had sent hundreds of applications, heard back from almost none. Their parents kept telling them to try harder. And so they wrote it down publicly with a title that said everything, "You're not broken. The job market is." That post got 245,000 views in 2 days. Not because it was shocking, because it was familiar. Right now, if you are between 22 and 30, trying to start a career, trying to land your first real job, trying to turn a degree into a life, the system is doing something to you that it has never quite done to any generation before it. And what makes it genuinely different from every previous job market crisis isn't the unemployment rate. It isn't the layoffs. It isn't even AI, despite what every headline is screaming. It's this. For the first time in modern economic history, the recovery might not bring the jobs back. I want to be precise about that, because it sounds apocalyptic and I don't mean it that way. I mean it structurally.
How does one get to the second part of an interview process? Because I've submitted my resume to about a bajillion companies, just a bajillion job positions, and every single one gets rejected.
Not in my house.
The 2008 financial crisis was a collapse of demand. Credit froze, spending fell, hiring stopped, and then, over years, it came back. The jobs returned because the system that produced them was still intact underneath the crisis. What is happening now is different. Not because the unemployment rate is higher. It isn't. Not because more people are being laid off, though 2025's layoff numbers were ugly. But because the architecture underneath the job market is being redesigned in real time, and nobody in a position to do something about it is treating it like the emergency it is. Minus 54%. Combined FAANG hiring collapse in 1 year. Google alone dropped 81%. Meta, 67%. These are the most profitable companies in capitalism's history, posting record revenues, simultaneously freezing entry into the industry an entire generation was told to aim for. You studied for it. You went into debt for it. You optimized your resume for it. And then the door closed.
Class of 2025, we need to talk. If you're a recent grad struggling to find a job, it's not just you, it's the numbers. Jobs have gone down, and the number of qualified applicants continues to rise. The 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate for recent grads currently sits at roughly 5.3%, well above the national average of 4.2%. This is a historic anomaly. This is likely the first time the number has ever been this high for new grads, ever. What this shows us is that entry-level jobs are being taken by AI. Now, it's happening.
That is the story. And it is bigger and more complicated than any single headline has made it look. The numbers that don't add up. Let me give you the official picture first, because the official picture is where the gaslighting starts. The headline unemployment rate in the United States is, depending on which month you're looking at, somewhere between 4.1% and 4.4%. Historically low. By the traditional measure, most economists would describe the labor market as close to healthy. And yet, something is not adding up. The labor force participation rate, the proportion of the working-age population actually in work, has been declining since at least 2000. More than 1/3 of Americans are currently out of work. That is the highest share since the late 1970s. And critically, the traditional unemployment rate does not count people who have stopped looking. It does not count people working part-time, because they cannot find full-time work. It does not count the graduate doing delivery work while applying to their 400th entry-level position. What the headline number counts is a narrow slice of the full picture. And the full picture is considerably worse. Now add the graduate layer. 5.8%. Unemployment rate among recent U.S. college graduates, the highest since 2013, excluding the pandemic years. This is the number that should be leading every business news segment. It isn't. And here is the detail that should dismantle the entire premise of the advice given to young people for 30 years. The highest unemployment rates right now are not in arts and humanities. They are in STEM. Physics, 7.8% unemployment. Computer engineering, 7.5%. Computer science, 6.1%. Chemistry, 6.1%. You were told to do the hard thing, to study the difficult subjects, ignore your passions, pursue the high-demand fields. And those fields now have higher graduate unemployment than the national average. Meanwhile, employers are still posting on LinkedIn about skills shortages. Companies are still running advertisements for roles that nobody will ever be hired into. The official language of the job market still talks about opportunities, growth, and the future of work. And then a post gets 245,000 views because it just says, "I applied everywhere and heard nothing back." I am not broken. The job market is. The disconnection between the official numbers and the lived experience is so wide it has stopped being confusing and started being insulting. It's been almost 4 years of horrible job market. At what point do we admit this isn't cyclical? Fred data shows job postings are as bad if not worse than the worst part of the pandemic, when hardly anyone was hiring. That doesn't factor in all the new games being played, like ghost jobs. Factor that in, and it's probably way worse. 4 years. That is longer than any previous tech downturn in recent history. And the data on the Federal Reserve's own Fred database backs it up. The ghost machine. Here is something that has happened quietly to the hiring process over the past 5 years, and that most people outside of it do not fully understand. Ghost jobs are now a structural feature of the labor market, not an anomaly. A jobs analytics company tracked this specific data point over time. In 2018, 1 in every 5 job postings would not result in a hire. The posting would go up, sit there, and come down without anyone getting the job because the role was filled internally, budgets changed, or the company was collecting CVs for a future pipeline. 1 in 2 job postings today will not result in a hire, up from 1 in 5 in 2018. You send applications into what feels like a void because, in a literal sense, many of them are going into a void. And the situation is self-reinforcing in the worst possible way. NPR's Indicator podcast called it the AI doom loop. And the mechanics of it are worth understanding. Because applying for jobs has become so easy, click, autofill, submit, the volume of applications per posting has exploded. Employers now receive hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications for a single role. To manage that volume, they deploy automated applicant tracking systems that scan for keywords before any human ever sees your CV. To get past those systems, applicants hide keywords in white text, reformat their experience to match job description language word for word, and increasingly use AI to apply in bulk, which generates more applications, which overwhelms the systems further, which leads to more automation, which leads to less human contact and more ghosting, which leads to more mass applying out of desperation. The machine is eating itself, and the human being who spent 3 hours personalizing a cover letter is being filtered out by an algorithm trained by someone who probably did not recognize their own biases. That is the process right now. For the most consequential financial decision of a young person's life, getting their first real job, they are alone in a black box, applying into a system that may or may not be running a real search, being filtered by an AI they cannot see, and receiving no feedback whatsoever. Here's some of the worst things I've noticed. Too many job postings aren't even real. Some are fake, some are scammers, and some are companies that post roles they never plan to hire for. And for the ones that are legit, people are being dragged through an average of 3 to 4 interviews, sometimes more, just to be ghosted or told we went another direction. Studies show over 40% of job seekers believe they've applied to fake or misleading postings in the last year. Over 40% of job seekers believe they have applied to fake or misleading postings in the past year. The average time to hire keeps stretching. Wages stay flat. And 3 to 4 interview rounds for an entry-level role before being ghosted has become so common it barely registers as unusual anymore. This is not a job market that is working. This is a job market that has optimized itself for the employer's convenience at every single stage and made itself maximally humiliating for anyone trying to enter it. The AI scapegoat, what is actually happening? Now let's talk about AI, because AI is getting blamed for almost everything in this story. And the truth is simultaneously more reassuring and more disturbing than the AI narrative suggests. 1.2M, layoff announcements in 2025, a 58% jump from 2024, and the 7th highest annual total since tracking began in 1989. The media connected it almost entirely to AI. That connection is mostly wrong. Of those 1.2 million layoff announcements, 54,836 were linked to AI by the outplacement firm Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. That is 4.5% of the total. The remaining 95.5% came from other causes. Federal workforce reductions under DOGE alone accounted for 293,753 cuts. Store closings, market conditions, restructuring, and most significantly, the unwinding of a pandemic-era hiring binge that left companies dramatically overstaffed relative to the normalized economy. The job postings drop that everyone points to as evidence of AI displacement? It began before ChatGPT was released in November 2022. What happened around that time was the Federal Reserve raising interest rates by 5 percentage points in one of the most aggressive monetary tightening cycles in decades. The fall in vacancies tracks the rate cycle, not AI adoption. Oxford Economics. Their analysis finds that firms do not appear to be replacing workers with AI on a significant scale. Their more cynical interpretation. Companies may be using AI as narrative cover for regularly scheduled headcount reductions. Blaming AI signals modernization and efficiency to investors. Blaming your own hiring binge does not. Hot take alert, the AI narrative is being used as a cleaner story from messier realities. When a company announces layoffs and attributes them to AI adoption, it signals to investors that it is modernizing. The incentive to use AI as a scapegoat is structural, not conspiratorial. So what is actually driving the entry-level collapse? 3 real forces. First, degree inflation. The majority of the working-age population, 55%, now has some form of degree. More educated than any previous generation. More of them out of work. Because the number of degree holders competing for a relatively fixed pool of graduate-level roles has increased, the credential premium has collapsed. College graduates used to have a clear employment advantage over the overall workforce. That trend has now inverted. Recent graduates have a higher unemployment rate than the average worker. Associate and bachelor's degree holders are in the most difficult position, credential limbo, where it is hard to get a stable salaried job, but high-turnover, low-wage industries are reluctant to hire them because they assume they will leave. They are too educated for one market and not qualified enough for another. Second, the FAANG collapse is real and structural. Google down 81%, Meta down 67%, Netflix down 38%, Microsoft down 23%. These numbers compare equivalent 75-day windows year over year in the same calendar period. Overall combined hiring down 54%. In 1 year, during which all of these companies reported record profits. The most obvious reason it feels worse than 2008 is because those job losses were caused by a recession. Now we have historically low hiring in many sectors, while companies make record profits. After 2008 subsided, we saw a plethora of new opportunities, especially in tech. Nowadays, there is no realistic situation where interest rates go down and companies use that money to hire more employees, especially entry-level. They'd rather reward shareholders first. Third, these FAANG decisions are strategic announcements, not cyclical responses. When Amazon CEO Andy Jassy says the company will reduce headcount as it gets efficiency gains from AI, that is a permanent operating model announcement, not a response to a bad quarter. When Walmart's CEO Doug McMillon says AI is going to change literally every job and announces a hiring freeze, they are describing the future, not reacting to the present. The AI narrative is mostly wrong about 2025. It may be largely right about 2027 and beyond. That distinction changes what you should do with the information. Why this is not 2008 and why that matters. A Reddit post from someone in the tech industry framed this better than most economists have, and it deserves the space. I was in middle school when the 2008 recession went into full swing. While the crisis was dire, the underlying structure of the economy and job market remained intact. The problem we face now is a redesign of the idea of work itself, and no one is truly safe from the future of what's to come. In 2008, you could say the job market was paused. Now the jobs are being deleted, atomized, transferred elsewhere, or converted into unstable contract work. That framing is correct, and the mechanism it identifies is the one that makes the recovery story so uncertain. In 2008, the job market paused. Companies stopped hiring because credit froze, and spending fell. But the roles still existed in concept. When demand returned, companies hired for them again. The system had broken down, but was structurally intact. What is happening now is different in kind. When a company discovers it can have mid-level employees using AI to do what previously required 5 junior employees, it does not bring those 5 junior roles back when the economy improves. The efficiency gain is permanent. The headcount reduction gets baked into the operating model, written into investor communications, reflected in the stock price. AI selectively eliminates the roles that can be broken down into repeatable cognitive tasks: drafting, summarizing, triaging, translating, formatting, basic analysis, customer support scripts, simple coding, documentation, project coordination, routine marketing copy. That is the syllabus of the entry-level white-collar job. That is the training ground an entire generation was supposed to climb through. A company that previously hired juniors and trained them may now rely on existing mid-levels using AI to do what the juniors used to do. The pipeline closes, not because business is bad, because business is fine without the pipeline. And even if the economy improves, Interest rates fall, consumer spending returns, the incentive to reopen that pipeline is gone. Output can be increased by licensing more AI seats, scaling vendor contracts, offshoring more functions, asking a smaller domestic workforce to do more. You can have GDP growth without job growth. You can have stock market optimism alongside population-level despair. That decoupling between aggregate economic health and individual employment prospects is what makes the current situation categorically different from any previous downturn. Tristan Harris, former Google ethicist, AI is like NAFTA 2.0, except instead of China appearing on the world stage to do manufacturing labor for cheap, suddenly this country of geniuses in a data center appears on the world stage, and it will do all the cognitive labor in the economy for less than minimum wage. Harris argues the current unstructured AI build-out could trigger a global jobs market collapse by 2027 if left unchecked. His timeline may or may not be right. His mechanism is hard to argue with. He adds this: "This is the last moment that human political power will matter. Does the state need humans anymore? Their GDP is coming in almost entirely from the AI companies. So suddenly, this political class, this political power base, they become the useless class." The White House is focused on winning the AI race with China. Congress is focused on other things. The corporate sector is focused on efficiency gains. And 22-year-olds are sending applications into ghost job systems and being told by people who got their first jobs in 1995 to try harder and network more. The worst part is that recovery doesn't mean the jobs will return. This is the heart of why today feels worse than 2008. The normal recovery story of demand returning and hiring rebounding will never happen when technology, offshoring, and market tricks allow expansion without proportional domestic hiring. You can have GDP growth without job growth. You can have stock market optimism alongside populational despair. The fault line nobody wants to talk about. Now I want to go somewhere that most coverage of this story does not go, because it is politically uncomfortable, and because it is the most important thing to understand about where this crisis is heading socially. The job market is not hitting men and women equally. The education system is not producing men and women with equal credentials. And the collision of those two facts is creating a political fault line that will shape the next decade of American politics. Here is the data. 10%. The gap between men and women aged 25 to 34 with bachelor's degrees and widening. In graduate enrollment, men at 39%, women at 61%. Women are out-educating men across every racial group in America. Credential inflation, the structural collapse of the value of a bachelor's degree, disproportionately punishes people without postgraduate credentials. And the group that disproportionately lacks those credentials is men. The result, a growing cohort of working-age men without degrees falling out of the labor market entirely, not unemployed by the official measure. Simply no longer participating, no longer looking. The official unemployment rate does not count them. What does that cohort do? The Spectator analysis is direct. Traditionally, large numbers of idle and discontented young men have been a major problem for social stability. This is the demographic most likely to cause serious problems, including gang and even revolutionary violence. Right now, the answer is, they go online. Virtual communities for every disposition, anti-work, crypto speculation, manosphere content, political radicalism. The smartphone and the infinite feed have absorbed the social energy that used to manifest in more physically destabilizing ways. Dopamine substitution for economic participation. But this is producing a specific political realignment that is already visible in the data. 37%. The Gen Z gender gap in political identification, women at plus 19% Democrat, men at plus 18% Republican, within a single generation. Between people who went to the same high schools. The Spectator's read of this is worth taking seriously. Facile analyses blame broadcasters and manosphere influencers, but this ignores the basic realities of the economy. The dynamic where professional women identify with the Democrats and working-class men identify with right-wing populism is a structural effect of gaps in economic achievement, not any ideological failing on either side. The job market is not producing a hiring crisis. It is producing a social and political fracture that will outlast any individual hiring cycle or interest rate adjustment. When the young have no hope of owning a home or forming a family, what follows is escapism, nostalgia, and political radicalization. That sequence is visible everywhere, and it is being fed by economic conditions, not primarily by media manipulation. This is also visible in the UK, where London's unemployment rate just hit 7.9%, a 12-year high. There are now 416,000 adults classified as unemployed in London alone. Youth unemployment across Britain is 13.7% for 18 to 24-year-olds. A Bank of England policymaker acknowledged that sharp minimum wage increases for younger workers contributed to their higher unemployment, while London's professional services sector absorbed job losses from AI adoption in financial and legal services. Same forces. Different country, same generation caught in the middle. The counter-argument played straight. Now I am going to do something slightly unfair to the doom narrative, because it is important. The Financial Times ran a deliberate contrarian take titled, "Don't Fear the AI Job Apocalypse," and the argument deserves to be heard, not because it is comfortable, but because it is partially right. The FT's case. Job losses attributed to AI in 2025 amounted to 4.5% of total layoffs. Employment in white-collar roles, the categories supposedly most at risk, has actually increased overall since ChatGPT was released. The drop in job postings predates AI. It correlates with the rate cycle. A 2021 study found older, less tech-savvy workers were hit hardest by the IT revolution of the 1980s. Young people adapted fastest. MIT economist David Deming. Over the last century, disruptive innovation has generally favored the young and the well-educated. Today, young people's relative tech fluency and capacity to retrain mean they can adapt to new ways of doing things. LinkedIn estimates AI has generated 1.3 million new jobs globally between 2023 and 2025. A 2022 academic analysis found that 60% of jobs that exist today did not exist in 1940. The historical long-run argument is that technology creates more jobs than it destroys, and that argument is historically accurate. There is also a live data point that cuts against the doom narrative entirely. Computer science master's graduates are starting at $81,535 in 2026, up 7% year over year, making the CS Masters the single most in-demand graduate credential on the market, currently outpacing even the MBA. Kareem Megji of Link. AI isn't killing computer science, it's making it more essential. The Burning Glass Institute analyzed millions of job postings and found that even as AI automates certain skills, it is simultaneously elevating demand for others, often within the same roles. The project manager whose scheduling is automated may now have wider strategic responsibilities. The financial analyst who no longer builds models from scratch now interrogates AI output. These are real counterpoints. The history of technology and employment is genuinely on their side in the long run. But here is what the counterargument does not solve. It does not solve the transition problem. The new jobs AI creates will not be the same jobs it eliminates, and they will not be filled by the same people. The gap between what gets eliminated and what gets created, in terms of skills, timelines, and locations, is real, and it falls heaviest on the people least equipped to bridge it. It does not solve the pipeline problem. Even if the long-run argument is historically accurate, that creation happens over decades with enormous disruption in the interim. The person who cannot get a job in 2025 cannot wait 20 years for the equilibrium to return. They need rent money now, and it does not address what the Reddit threads identified. The possibility that the recovery mechanism itself has changed. If companies can grow output by scaling AI and contracting headcount permanently, the historical link between GDP growth and job creation weakens. You can have economic growth, record corporate profits, and a chronically underemployed generation simultaneously. What you should actually do with this. So let me tell you what the evidence actually suggests. Because the job market is broken is a complete sentence only if you stop there. And stopping there helps no one. First, you are not imagining it. The structure of the market has shifted in ways that disadvantage people at exactly your career stage. That is a fact, not a pep talk. Recognizing that the difficulty is structural, not a personal failing, is actually important for making clear-headed decisions about what to do next. Second, AI fluency is no longer optional. But the specific skill that is in demand is not passive AI use. It is the ability to direct, interrogate, and govern AI output to be the human accountability layer in an AI-assisted process. Employers are competing to hire people who combine domain expertise with AI fluency. That combination is what the Goldman Sachs executives' advice, know your commercial impact, understand what you bring to the table, actually means in practice. The AI handles the commodity tasks. Your job is to know what the AI cannot. Third, the credential premium is narrowing, but it is not gone. It is just narrowing faster for mid-tier, high-cost programs with vague career pathways. If you are in a program that cannot clearly articulate what doors it opens, examine that before you graduate. The debt-to-signal ratio of a prestigious-sounding degree with weak placement outcomes is one of the worst financial decisions you can make in this market. Fourth, the human skills that resist automation are not soft skills in the dismissive sense. They are judgment, accountability, genuine communication, and leadership. Competencies that resist reduction to repeatable cognitive steps. LinkedIn's data shows that conflict mitigation, Adaptability, process optimization, and innovative thinking are in the top 5 fastest-growing skills, right alongside AI literacy. Build those explicitly, not as a fallback. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon. Sometimes the best opportunities come from being asked to do something you don't want to do and actually taking it on. That's when people grow the most. That's where I grew the most. Fifth, the entry-level job, as a concept, is being redesigned. The role of the junior employee as the person who does administrative and routine cognitive tasks while being trained into something more senior, that model is under structural pressure, which means the alternative path, building specific expertise, doing client-facing work earlier, accumulating a portfolio of demonstrated outcomes rather than a timeline of job titles, is becoming more viable relative to the traditional ladder, not less. The people who are making it in this market are not the best performers of the applicant role. They are the ones making themselves impossible to pass over through a specific combination of technical fluency, human skills, and demonstrated commercial value. That combination is harder to manufacture than a polished CV. It takes longer. It is less legible to an ATS, but it is what the market is actually selecting for. The real question, the one nobody is asking. Let me come back to where we started. The post that got 245,000 views in 2 days was not interesting because it described a unique experience. It was interesting because it described a universal one. Hundreds of thousands of people read, "You are not broken, the job market is," and felt something that sounded like relief. The specific relief of having your reality named accurately after a long period of being told it doesn't exist. That naming matters, but it is not the same as a solution. The structural forces at work here, the credential inflation, the AI adoption, the FAANG hiring collapse, the ghost job machine, the permanent efficiency gains embedded in corporate operating models, are not going to be resolved by advice or resilience or individual hustle. Some of them will require policy. Some will be resolved by the eventual creation of new job categories that do not yet have names. Some will outlast the next several election cycles entirely. The history of technological disruption tells us the long run is real. New technologies do create more jobs than they destroy, eventually, over decades, unevenly, with enormous pain in the transition. What that history does not tell you is how to pay rent in 2026 while waiting for 2040. And that gap between the long-run economic argument and the short-run human experience is the gap that nobody in a position of power is taking seriously enough. The White House is focused on winning the AI race with China. Congress is focused on other things. The corporate sector is focused on efficiency gains and shareholder returns. And 22-year-olds are being filtered by ATS algorithms and being told by people who got their first jobs in 1995 to try harder and network more. The Anthropic CEO told Axios that AI could wipe out half of U.S. entry-level white-collar jobs. The Ford CEO said AI will leave a lot of white-collar people behind. The Amazon CEO announced a permanent reduction in the corporate workforce. These are not predictions. These are announcements. A generation that was told, get the degree, aim for the prestigious firm, build the career, follow the ladder, is now entering a labor market where the bottom rungs of that ladder are being quietly removed. And the question that nobody, not the White House, not the Fed, not the corporate sector, seems to be seriously engaging with is this. What does a society look like when an educated, able-bodied generation cannot find a stable place in the economy? When the credential they were promised would open doors is no longer opening them? When the jobs are not paused but deleted, atomized, transferred, or replaced? The answer, from the research on labor force dropouts, from the gender political realignment, from the explosion of online radicalization communities, from the delayed housing purchases and family formation, the answer is that society starts to look different. More fragile, more angry, more susceptible to political frameworks that promise to name and punish the people responsible. That is not a prediction. That is a current observation. The process is already visible. A Burning Glass Institute analysis. AI isn't sorting the labor market into winners and losers. It's transforming job content across a broad swath of the economy. The question is whether that transformation is happening fast enough, and whether anyone in power is managing the transition or just riding the wave. There is something specific happening to the workers who are losing their leverage in this economy, and it is not the generation most people are talking about. That is the next podcast. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss it.